On September 11, 1973, at noon, two British-built Hawker Hunter jets banked over Santiago. They fired rockets into the presidential palace. The building was called La Moneda, the Mint. It had stood for 200 years. Inside, the democratically elected president of Chile was at his desk. He had been informed at 6 in the morning that his navy had mutinied. By 8, the army had moved. By 9, the Air Force was bombing his palace. He had a helmet on. He had an automatic rifle, a gift from Fidel Castro. He refused to leave. At 1:45 in the afternoon, after the building was on fire, he died inside it. He was 65 years old. The date was September 11, 1973. Americans don't know that date. Americans have another September 11th to remember. But in Chile and across Latin America, this is the September 11th that defined the late 20th century, the day a democracy was destroyed, the day a 17-year dictatorship began, the day the United States, through the CIA and the National Security Advisor's Office, finished a 3-year project. For decades, the United States denied any role. Then, between 1999 and 2003, 24,000 documents were declassified. The cables, the memos, the phone transcripts, the minutes of the committee that approved covert operations. The documents are conclusive. The man who said he saw no reason to watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. That man was the Secretary of State of the United States. The country was Chile. The people had just voted. This is the file. The official version, the one Americans heard for decades, went like this. Chile, in the early 1970s, was in chaos. A Marxist named Salvador Allende had taken power. He was driving the country into economic collapse. The Chilean military, with popular support, restored order. The United States, watching from a distance, was sympathetic but uninvolved. That version held in textbooks for over 20 years. Kissinger repeated it in his memoirs, on television, under congressional questioning. Then the documents came out, the Nixon tapes, the State Department cables, the CIA's own internal histories. The picture they show is not ambiguous. On September 4, 1970, Salvador Allende won the Chilean presidential election with 36% of the vote. It was a three-way race. Under the Chilean constitution, when no candidate won a majority, the decision went to Congress. By long tradition, Congress confirmed whoever had won the plurality. The confirmation was scheduled for October 24th. That left the United States about 7 weeks. On September 15, 1970, 11 days after the election, Nixon called CIA Director Richard Helms into the Oval Office. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. Helms took notes. Those notes were declassified in 1975. They read, in Helms's own handwriting, 1 in 10 chance perhaps, but save Chile. Worth spending, not concerned about risks, no involvement of embassy. $10 million available, more if necessary. Full-time job, best men we have. Make the economy scream. 48 hours for plan of action. That note is in the National Security Archive. It can be downloaded. It is the founding document of what happened next. Within days, the CIA divided its operation into 2 tracks. Track 1 was political. Track 2 was military. Track 1 lobbied the Chilean Congress to vote against Allende's confirmation. Track 2 looked for officers willing to overthrow him. Track 2 had a problem. The commander of the Chilean army was a constitutionalist named General René Schneider. Schneider believed the army's job was to defend the Constitution, not overthrow elected presidents. He had said so publicly. As long as Schneider was in command, the army would not move. The CIA decided he had to be removed. On October 22, 1970, 2 days before Congress was to confirm Allende, a group of officers ambushed Schneider's car. They had been supplied with weapons by the CIA, machine guns, ammunition, and tear gas, delivered by diplomatic pouch. The ambush went wrong. Schneider drew a pistol to defend himself. The attackers shot him 3 times. He died in a military hospital 3 days later. The CIA's own internal review acknowledged it had supplied the weapons. 2 of the attackers had been on the CIA payroll. In 2001, Schneider's sons sued Henry Kissinger for wrongful death. The case was dismissed. Kissinger, the court found, had been acting in his official capacity. The assassination didn't stop the confirmation. Chile rallied around constitutional government. Allende was confirmed on October 24th, as planned. He took office on November 3rd. The first track had failed. The second track had killed a general for nothing. Now someone will say Allende really was a Marxist. He really was nationalizing American property. He really was aligned with Castro. Look at what Allende actually did, and at what the United States actually feared. The two things were not the same. Allende was a 62-year-old physician who had been a senator for 25 years. He had run for president 3 times. His program included nationalizing the copper industry, which was 80% owned by 2 American companies, Anaconda and Kennecott. The copper nationalization passed the Chilean Congress in July 1971 by a unanimous vote. Every political party in Chile, including the conservative opposition, voted for it. It was a national policy, not a Marxist one. A national intelligence estimate from August 1970 concluded that Allende would not align Chile with the Soviet Union. He would not establish a communist dictatorship. He would not threaten U.S. national security in any meaningful sense. The CIA's own analysts told their own government in writing that the official rationale would not hold up. The operation went forward anyway. So what was the real motive? Read the Nixon tapes. A conversation from September 16, 1970, 12 days after the election. Nixon on tape. That son of a bitch. And Kissinger, June 11, 1971. The example of a successful elected Marxist government in Chile would surely have an impact on, and even precedent value for, other parts of the world, especially in Italy. Read that sentence carefully. The threat was not that Allende would fail. The threat was that he would succeed, that voters in Italy, in France, in Spain, might draw a conclusion. The fear, in writing, was the example. Kissinger said it more plainly to the 40 Committee on June 27, 1970. I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. That sentence is in the declassified minutes. The people he was talking about were the people who had just voted. The irresponsibility he referred to was the act of choosing. Between 1970 and 1973, the United States ran what the documents call a destabilization campaign. The CIA spent at least $8 million on it. The actual figure is likely higher. The money funded opposition newspapers. El Mercurio, Chile's largest paper, received over $1 million in CIA funding. It funded strikes. The truckers' strike of October 1972, which paralyzed the Chilean economy, was partly CIA financed. Nixon's instruction to Helms had been to make the economy scream. That is what was done. The United States cut off credit from the Export-Import Bank. It pressured private American banks to do the same. It used its influence at the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank to block loans. Chile's access to capital was strangled. The Chilean economy suffered. Inflation rose. Shortages developed. By 1973, inflation was over 300%. The middle class turned against the government. Strikes were continuous. The country was polarized. And then, in September 1973, the military moved. The coup was led by General Augusto Pinochet. Allende had appointed him commander of the army just 3 weeks earlier. Allende believed Pinochet was a constitutionalist who would defend the elected government. He was wrong. U.S. Ming embassy records from August 1973 show Pinochet had been in contact with the conspirators for weeks. The morning of September 11th, Allende went to La Moneda before dawn. He could have fled. The military offered him safe passage out of the country with his family. He refused. At 9:10 in the morning, he gave his last radio address. The speech is preserved in audio and transcript. He said, "These are my last words. I am certain that my sacrifice will not be in vain. I am certain that, at the very least, it will be a moral lesson that will punish felony, cowardice, and treason. Workers of my country, I have faith in Chile and its destiny. Other men will overcome this dark and bitter moment when treason seeks to prevail. May you continue to know that, much sooner than later, the great avenues will again be opened, through which free men will pass to build a better society. Long live Chile. Long live the people. Long live the workers. The radio station was bombed off the air shortly after. The jets came at noon. Allende was found dead inside the palace at around 2:30 in the afternoon. A Chilean court in 2011 determined, after extensive forensic review, that he had died by his own rifle. He had chosen to die in his office rather than leave it. The 17-year dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet had begun. What followed is documented in two truth commissions, the Rettig Report of 1991 and the Valak Report of 2004. Both were commissioned by Chilean democratic governments after Pinochet finally left power in 1990, killed or disappeared by the Pinochet regime. 3,216 confirmed cases, with serious estimates running higher. Tortured, at least 38,254 documented cases. Forced into exile, approximately 200,000. The Estadio Nacional, the National Stadium of Santiago, was converted in the days after the coup into a mass detention center. Over 40,000 Chileans were held there in the first 2 months. Hundreds were executed inside it. American journalist Charles Horman was one of them. He was identified, held in the stadium, and killed. His death was the subject of the 1982 film Missing. His family sued the U.S. government for 30 years. Documents declassified in 1999 confirmed the U.S. Embassy had information about Horman's detention and did not act to save him. The United States continued to support the Pinochet regime throughout the 1970s and 1980s. American military aid, training, and intelligence cooperation continued. Operation Condor coordinated South American dictatorships to assassinate opponents across borders. The full extent of CIA logistical support for Condor was documented in records released between 2000 and 2010. In 1976, agents of the Pinochet regime detonated a car bomb in Washington, D.C. It killed Orlando Letelier, Allende's former ambassador to the United States, and his American assistant, Ronnie Moffett. The bombing took place on Embassy Row, 3 miles from the White House. It is, to this day, one of the only acts of foreign state terrorism ever committed on American soil. The human face of this story is not Allende, who has become a symbol. It is a woman named Michelle Bachelet. In September 1973, she was 21 years old, a medical student in Santiago. Her father, Alberto Bachelet, was a general in the Chilean Air Force. He refused to support the coup. He was arrested on September 11, 1973, and held in the Air Force Academy. He was tortured for 6 months. He died of cardiac arrest in March 1974. His tormentors had stopped treatment for his heart condition. Michelle Bachelet and her mother were arrested in January 1975. They were taken to Villa Grimaldi, a DINA detention center. They were tortured. They survived. They went into exile in East Germany. She returned to Chile in 1979. She finished medical school. She practiced pediatrics. She entered politics after Pinochet fell in 1990. In 2006, she became the first woman elected president of Chile. She served 2 terms. She later became the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. The daughter of one of Pinochet's victims governed the country that had killed her father. That is what survival of a coup looks like across a generation. The wounds do not close. They become the politics of the next 40 years. The men who designed the policy on the American side were never charged. Nixon resigned in August 1974 for Watergate, not for Chile. Henry Kissinger continued in office through 1977, was repeatedly considered for further appointments, and lived to be 100 years old. He died in November 2023. To the end of his life, he denied responsibility for Chile. Richard Helms was indicted in 1977, not for Chile, but for lying to Congress about Chile. He pleaded no contest. He received a suspended sentence and a $2,000 fine. He kept his CIA pension. In 1976, Senator Frank Church said in a public hearing. Like a vast and incalculable hand, our government reached out from afar to topple a government in Chile. That sentence is in the official record. President Clinton, in 2000, said the United States had made mistakes in Chile. He did not name Allende. He did not apologize. The released documents were the apology. They were also the only one. In Santiago today, on the wall of the rebuilt La Moneda Palace, there is a small plaque. Chilean schoolchildren visit it. American history textbooks, by and large, do not mention any of this. Put the evidence side by side. In 1970, a democratically elected president won 36% in a three-way race and was confirmed by his Congress. The President of the United States ordered the CIA to overthrow him 4 days after the election. The order is in Helms's handwriting. A general who refused to help overthrow the elected government was killed with CIA-supplied weapons. 3 years of economic strangulation followed. The coup came on September 11, 1973. The president died in his palace. A 17-year dictatorship killed at least 3,000 people and tortured tens of thousands more. The men who designed the American policy were never charged. The documents that prove it were declassified between 1999 and 2010. They are available online. The question worth asking is this: what if Allende had been allowed to govern? What if the United States had simply let Chile alone? Would Chilean democracy have survived? Would Allende's experiment have failed through Chilean votes? Would Chile have become a country where the left sometimes governed and sometimes lost? Would 3,000 people still be alive? Would Michelle Bachelet have grown up with her father? We don't know. We can't know. But we know what the CIA's own analysts said. In writing, before the operation began, Allende was not a Soviet puppet. He would not align Chile with Moscow. He did not threaten the United States. The real fear, in Kissinger's own words, was that Allende might succeed, that the example might spread. A sentence from a Washington committee meeting, 1970. I don't see why we need to stand by and watch a country go communist due to the irresponsibility of its people. The people he was talking about were the people who had just voted. The silence around that sentence, after 50 years, in American classrooms, is its own kind of answer.